massive CSS file when you go to production. Ultimately though, Tailwind is for developers who want to get highly customized stuff done faster. To follow along with this project, open up your editor and then pull up a terminal session. And I've installed the Tailwind extension for VS Code. The first thing we'll want to do is generate a project with a JavaScript framework, like React, Vue, Angular, Svelte, etc. One of the major reasons Tailwind is so popular is because it works really well with component-based JavaScript libraries. I'm going to use React for this demo, but the same principles apply to any other framework, and you'll find setup instructions for all the major frameworks in the official Tailwind docs. For this demo, I've created a new project with Create React App. To add Tailwind to it, we need to install our dependencies, then install a package called Krakow to override the native post-CSS configuration. Use it to replace React scripts in the package JSON, then create a Krakow config file to apply the Tailwind plugin. From there, we can use npx to run the Tailwind CLI init command, which will generate a Tailwind config in the root of the project. And finally, we go into our index CSS file and use the Tailwind directive to include the actual Tailwind styles in our project. Run npm start to run the project locally. That was kind of a lot of work to set up, but I think by the end of the video, you'll see that it was well worth it. Let's first open up the Tailwind config file. This file is used to customize the behavior of Tailwind. You can use it to customize colors, add plugins, and a bunch of other things. One change I'm going to make right away is to enable just-in-time mode. As of today, this feature is in developer preview, but it will compile your CSS on the fly, making your build times much faster. The other thing we can do is tell Tailwind to purge any unused CSS from our final bundle. It's not really relevant to this video, but if we were deploying to production, it would allow us to ship a very small CSS file to the browser. Now let's go ahead and open up a React component in the project. You'll notice that when I add a CSS class to it, we get this awesome IntelliSense with every single Tailwind utility available to us. The whole idea behind Tailwind is that you add these utilities together to design your UI directly in the HTML. For example, let's go ahead and take a paragraph element and apply the text center class to it. You'll notice that if you hover over this utility class, it will tell you the actual CSS used under the hood. If we want to add a color to it, we might say text green, and it will give us a palette of different green colors to choose from. There's a utility for pretty much anything you can imagine doing, and they're very carefully named. Just type out what you're trying to do, like bold, and there's likely a utility class to get the job done. Now, if we go ahead and view this code in the browser, you can see we have some green text in the middle of the screen. Now that you know the basics, it's time to build out an interactive and animated UI. You can find the full source code on GitHub, and it contains a more complete dashboard implemented with Tailwind. What we're going to focus on here is the sidebar, and the first thing we'll need is a flexible container to wrap the entire UI. The thing I love about Tailwind is that I don't really need to think of a class name in order to do that. I can just come in here to the root div in the app component and give it a class name of flex, which will apply the CSS display flex property to it. That's easy enough when you have one class to apply, but things get much harder to maintain when you have dozens of classes to apply to an element. The best way to keep your UI organized is to break it down into smaller components, which we can do by creating a new file like sidebar.js and then export a functional component from it called sidebar. Once that's done, we can then import that component from our main app component and declare it inside of the Flex container. Now back in the sidebar, I'll return some JSX from it, which contains a div and a React component in the project. You'll notice that when I add a worth it. Let's first open up the Tailwind config file. This file is used to customize the behavior of Tailwind. You can use it to customize colors, add plugins, and a bunch of other things.
What's up, you guys?
One change I'm going to make right away is to enable
I got nothing else to do.
As of today, this feature is in developer preview, but it will compile your CSS on the fly, making your build times much faster. The other thing we can do is tell Tailwind to purge any unused CSS from our final bundle. It's not really relevant to this video, but if we were deploying to production, it would allow us to ship a very small CSS file to the browser. Now let's go ahead and open up a React component in the project. You'll notice that when I add a CSS class to it, we get this awesome IntelliSense with every single Tailwind utility available to us. The whole idea behind Tailwind is that you add these utilities together to design your UI directly in the HTML. For example, let's go ahead and take a paragraph element and apply the text center class to it. You'll notice that if you hover over this utility class, it will tell you the actual CSS used under the hood. If we want to add a color to it, we might say text green, and it will give us a palette of different green colors to choose from. There's a utility for pretty much anything you can imagine doing, and they're very carefully named. named. Just type out what you're trying to do, like bold, and there's likely a utility class to get the job done. Now if we go ahead and view this code in the browser, you can see we have some green text in the middle of the screen. Now that you know the basics, it's time to build out an interactive and animated UI. You can find the full source code on GitHub, and it contains a more complete dashboard implemented with Tailwind. What we're going to focus on here is the sidebar, and the first thing we'll need is a flexible container to wrap the entire UI. The thing I love about Tailwind is that I don't really need to think of a class name in order to do that. I can just come in here to the root div in the app component and give it a class name of flex, which will apply the CSS display flex property to it. That's easy enough when you have one class to apply, but things get much harder to maintain when you have dozens of classes to apply to an element. The best way to keep your UI organized is to break it down into smaller components, which we can do by creating a new file like sidebar.js and then export a functional component from it called sidebar. Once that's done, we can then import that component from our main app component and declare it inside of the Flex container. Now back in the sidebar, I'll return some JSX from it, which contains a div and a bunch of icons that for now will just have text as placeholders. Now we can use Tailwind to position the container for the sidebar. It should be fixed to the top left corner of the screen, so naturally we use the fixed utility class to do that.
He uses this like, he uses this JS rather than JSX to make these components. But he's defining variable, which is a function.
Use top
so maybe it's
0.
just a newer
that applies
version
the top
of JSX.
property with a value of 0 pixels. You'll notice IntelliSense provides a bunch of different values for the top property, but sometimes you might need to throw a weird value in there, so you can use brackets followed by the pixels that you want to use, and Tailwind will automatically create a utility class for you. We don't need to do that here, but it is a cool trick to know if you there, so that applies. It should be fixed CSX from it, which contains a div and a bunch of icons that for now will just have text as placeholders. Now we can use Tailwind to position the container for the sidebar. It should be fixed to the top left corner of the screen, so naturally we use the fixed utility class to do that. Now to position it at the top, we use top -0. That applies the top property with a value of 0 pixels. You'll notice IntelliSense provides a bunch of different values for the top property, but sometimes you might need to throw a weird value in there, so you can use brackets followed by the pixels that you want to use, and Tailwind will automatically create a utility class for you. We don't need to do that here, but it is a cool trick to know if you want to break out of your design system. We also have a utility for the left property, but when it comes to the height, we want to use a responsive value where it's 100% of the view height. The utility for that is h-screen, which means it will take up the entire height of the screen. Now to apply the width, we'll use a value of w-16. You might intuitively think this means 16 pixels, but it actually means 16 units on Tailwind's spacing scale. It's designed to provide you with a set of constraints that make your spacing look good and consistent between elements. In this case, W16 means 4 rem or 64 pixels. Other utilities like M and P for margin and padding respectively follow the same spacing scale. That's all the code we need to position the sidebar.
The salt on that Dos Equis
No, I've never coded in PHP.
Half-empty pantry.
Oh, come on.
But now it's lucky enough to find it.
Bro. No, I've never coded in PHP. I'm Python boy. Slithery snake. How's it going, man? Welcome.
Elements inside of it. And
how's it going?
We'll give it a
Welcome back in.
Using BG-color, and Tailwind has a huge color palette with 9 different shades for each color built into the framework. When a color starts with BG, it will be applied as the CSS background property, and when it starts with text, it will be applied as the color property. And as a final touch, let's add a shadow to make the UI look a little more polished. You could easily spend hours fine-tuning a shadow, but Tailwind makes it super easy with a bunch of built-in shadows that look really nice out of the box. The end result should be a basic dark container
11
for
months.
The sidebar. The only problem though.
No, I'm a biochemist. I'm just learning this so I can. I have an idea for a product, and I want to make. I think I'm going to try it for my next project after I do my spectroscopy one. and we'll try it with our whackathon.
So let's take a look at how we can customize the color palette.
I'm trying to get
Open up
better
the Tailwind
at
config file
just
and
basic
find
web
the
dev
theme
though, so I
object
can
inside of it. One thing we
at
might
least
want to do
make
is extend the
somewhat better
theme with our own custom color types like primary and secondary. By doing that, Tailwind will give us our own unique set of utility classes based on these colors. For example, we could replace our other colors with BG primary or text secondary. However, it's worth noting that Tailwind ships with a bunch of other color palettes that we might want to use. If we import Tailwind colors, we can then set our gray colors to something else like blue-gray or warm-gray. But in this demo, I want our colors to look exactly like Discord. So I reverse engineered them from the Discord app, and I'm going to use those colors to replace the Tailwind defaults like so. The change is subtle, but our colors now match Discord exactly. And now we can switch gears to the animated icon buttons and tooltips in the navbar. The first thing I'll do is create a new React component called sidebar icon. It takes
I'm a
icon
formulation
component
chemist.
as an input prop and just renders out a div with a class of sidebar icon with the icon itself inside of it. There's a cool package called React Icons that allows us to import a bunch of different icons from libraries like Font Awesome and Bootstrap as React components. We can then declare our sidebar icon component and pass in an icon component as a prop. You should now be able to see these icons in the sidebar. But now here's where things get a little more interesting when it comes to Tailwind. Instead of using a utility class here, we're using our own custom class called sidebar icon. But this class is actually built up using Tailwind utilities. This is totally optional, but in some cases it makes more sense to create your own custom class with Tailwind as opposed to extracting out your own custom React component. If we want to add additional classes or components to Tailwind, we can go into the index CSS file and use the layer directive to extend the core components. From here we can define our own custom classes just like we would in regular CSS, but instead of properties and values, we'll use the apply directive and combine a bunch of Tailwind utilities together. We'll give an icon relative positioning, make it a flex container, and center the content in the middle. The element needs to be a square, so we'll provide a height and width of 12. When it comes to margins, you can target individual properties like top or bottom using MT or MB. But if they have the same value, you can be even more efficient by using MX or MY to take care of both of them at the same time. That takes care of the positioning for the icons. Now let's go ahead and give each icon a gray background and a text color of green. But now you might be wondering, how do we change these colors when we hover over an icon? Tailwind provides variants for CSS pseudo classes by simply prefixing existing classes with hover, focus, and things like that. It's also worth noting that there are variants like medium and large to
so you can abstract out basically what he's doing is he's abstracting out a style class in here and then applying it into the class.
Size of the viewport when building responsive layouts. Now in the demo, the color of each icon should change when you hover over it. However, on Discord, you'll notice that when you hover over an icon, it has this nice little animation that goes from a circle to a square with rounded corners. So how do animations work in Tailwind? Well, the first thing we'll need are some properties that change. In this case, we're already changing the colors on hover.
You're throwing that together so quick.
Change the border radius. It's XXL by default, which will create a circle, and then goes to XL on hover. We can then animate between these two states using transition all, which will create a CSS transition with some default settings. We can override the defaults like duration or easing with additional utility classes. And we now have these cool animated icons with a very minimal CSS footprint in our code. But now let's take things a step further by adding an animated tooltip to each icon. To make that possible, we'll first need to go back to our sidebar icon component. I'm going to add a default prop for text and then a span with a class of sidebar tooltip that displays that text. Then back in the CSS, let's go ahead and a class of icons with a very CSS transition with some default settings. We can override the defaults like duration or easing with additional utility classes. And we now have these cool animated icons with a very minimal CSS footprint in our code. But now let's take things a step further by adding an animated tooltip to each icon. To make that possible, we'll first need to go back to our sidebar icon component. I'm going to add a default prop for text and then a span with a class of sidebar tooltip that displays that text. Then back in the CSS, let's go ahead and build out that that class, once again using the apply directive. We'll add a bunch of classes here that I'm not going to explain again that will produce a UI where all of the tooltips are currently visible. The challenge though is that we want these elements to be invisible by default and only shown when the user hovers over the parent element. Making the tooltip invisible is easy. In this case, we'll give it a scale of 0 to accomplish that. But how do we change the scale when hovered? We can't use hover here because it's impossible for the user to hover over an invisible element. In Tailwind, we can apply classes to a child element when the parent is hovered using groups. A group is a clever way to apply classes to a child when the state of its parent changes. However, one important caveat to be aware of is that groups don't work properly in apply. Not a big deal, we can go back to our markup and use the classes there. It's a really simple process. Use the group utility on the parent class, then change the appearance of the child using variants like group hover, followed in this case by scale 100. The end result is a tooltip hidden by default that animates into view when the parent element is hovered. At this point, our demo is looking pretty good, but it's missing one important thing: dark mode. Tailwind makes dark mode really easy to implement, but we first need to opt into it in the config file. There are two ways to go about it. With media, Tailwind will look for the prefers color scheme property in CSS, and if it's dark, it will apply any classes that have the dark variant in front of it. That's pretty simple, but not ideal for every site. Another option is class, that will look on parent elements for a dark class, and when it's present, use the dark variant for any of its children. That's the strategy we use in this demo, and there's a custom React hook in the full source code to manage the user's preference in local storage. From there, the implementation of dark mode is simply a matter of going into your elements and using the dark variant to define the colors that you want to activate when dark mode is enabled. Congratulations, that's pretty much everything you need to know to start being super productive with Tailwind. If you found this video helpful, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. And if you're ready for more advanced content, consider becoming a pro member.
It's not just about saving time, it's about expanding what's possible. We are studio.
What if you could build clean and responsive UIs so that you'd never again have to Google how to center a div? Sounds like a dream, right? Well, let's make that dream a reality. I get it. Tutorial after tutorial, you're still struggling with responsive layouts, custom styling, and making the most out of Tailwind CSS. That's exactly why I created this complete and updated Tailwind CSS course. Not just another tutorial, but the one that finally clicks. This isn't your typical, here's a bunch of utility classes video. You don't fully understand how Tailwind works behind the scenes, aren't sure if you're following the best practices, struggle with dark mode, theming, or custom styles, feel lost when using pseudo classes, media queries, or dynamic utilities, rely on JavaScript for things that Tailwind can handle natively, or maybe you just want to master Tailwind CSS instead of just messing with it. Then you are the one I created this course for.
All right, here we go.
YouTube tutorial,
That's us, baby.
Just copying and pasting classes. You'll understand exactly how and why they work while mastering Tailwind's fundamentals. You'll learn how to structure Tailwind CSS projects the right way, the key principles behind utility-first styling, a complete guide to responsive layouts, how to implement dark mode and custom themes, and a bunch of pro tips to speed up your workflow. But that's just part one. Very soon, the entire course and much more will be available as a structured, lesson-based experience on our brand new platform, JS Mastery Pro. Over there, you'll find quizzes.
Is it pay to play? Oh. JS Mastery Pro. Let's see. It's pay to play. Come on. Pay to play. Of course it is. Pay to play.
Interactive exercises, additional deep dives, and you'll also get access to the full build and deploy section where we take everything you've learned and build a fully responsive,
All right, let's get into this, dude.
right in and master one of the most essential skills in modern web development. Tailwind CSS isn't just another styling framework. It's a utility-first ideology that makes building modern, responsive websites faster and easier. Unlike Bootstrap, Design, or Material UI, which come with predefined components and styles, Tailwind gives you complete control through small, reusable utility classes. So instead of writing custom CSS from scratch, you can simply combine these classes to style your site exactly how you want. This approach has completely transformed the way developers write CSS. Sure, UI kits are great at first, but tweaking them to match your design, that's a headache. Let's be honest, default UI component libraries stick out like fast food menus. They work, but they all look the same. Tailwind, on the other hand, is like a fully stocked kitchen. It gives you the ingredients, not
All right.
But do real companies actually use Tailwind? Absolutely. From OpenAI to Shopify, Loom, The Verge, Turbo, the official example showcase highlight styling game to the next level. Let's dive in. Let's quickly compare traditional CSS with Tailwind's utility-first approach. So how do we normally write CSS? Well, we create some elements and assign them CSS classes.
Yes.
Something like a div with a container and an h1 with a container heading. And then we define those classes in CSS. Dot container, give it a display flex, justify content center, you know the drill. And you can also style the heading. Here, container and container headings are just custom classes with predefined styles. But now let's rethink that with a utility-first mindset. What if instead of writing custom class names, we broke styles into small, reusable utility classes? Something like .flex will set a display of flex. Item center will set the align items to center, and so on. You can do the same thing for colors or even font sizes. With these utilities in place, we can now structure our HTML like this. You can create a div and give it class names of flex, justify center, item center. And the same thing goes with a p tag. See the difference? We're still using classes, but instead of defining custom class names, we're composing styles directly with utility classes. And this is exactly how Tailwind CSS works. Every Tailwind class is just a predefined CSS rule. For example, when we use flex, Tailwind generates that property behind the scenes. And I get how this might feel like just a lot of extra work, but trust me, it'll save you hours because you won't have to worry about class names, structuring styles with the BEM methodology, or managing gigantic CSS files. You can just use the utilities and Tailwind does the rest. But Tailwind's simplicity is also a cause for a lot of misconceptions around it. There's a common myth when talking about Tailwind, and that is, aren't all of these just inline styles? We're basically writing everything on a single tag, inline. So why can't we use just a regular CSS, applying a style property with a padding of 10 and a color of blue? Well, it's not really the same, because this doesn't allow you to use more advanced properties like pseudo classes, which we'll explore later on, and they also don't give you access to media queries. But even more importantly, inline styles cannot be reused. You have to rewrite them on every single element where you need them. But Tailwind CSS utility classes, on the other hand, are completely reusable, which means that you can create a small application. Hopefully, you can build a dive into complex layouts, files. I'll put the link to it. Start with a basic hello world. So far, super plain and super boring. So let's bring Tailwind into the mix. As I already mentioned, Tailwind provides a set of predefined utility classes to style elements without having to write custom CSS. For example, we can very easily style this h1. Just start by giving it a class and start typing text dash. And immediately, you'll see a dropdown with all of the related utilities. This will include alignment, font sizes, colors, and more, making it super easy to explore and apply all of these different styles. So let's apply a property of text-center, text-lg, as well as text-blue-400. And just so we don't have to stare at this white screen while everything else is dark, I'll put it right below and head over into CSS and target the body element by giving it a background color. 10172A is this nice Tailwind CSS color. And now if you want to apply some kind of a margin to this text element, you can say margin top 2 maybe, which will apply a slight margin to push it from the top, and you can easily change the text color to something like cyan 400. That's looking great. But now the main question is, how does Tailwind CSS actually work behind the scenes? Well, at the bottom here, there's a generated CSS tab. Click on it and it'll expand. Here, you can find different sections. All includes everything Tailwind generates, including default styles and theme-based utilities. Next, there's theme, which contains the Tailwind CSS built-in theme variables like colors, spacing, and more. There's base, which includes global styles like removing default margins from the body element, and then default style. Looking great. But now the main question is, how does Tailwind CSS actually work behind the scenes? Well, at the bottom here, there's a generated CSS tab. Click on it and it'll expand. Here, you can find different sections. All includes everything Tailwind generates, including default styles and theme-based utilities. Next, there's theme, which contains the Tailwind CSS built-in theme variables like colors, spacing, and more. There's base, which includes global styles like removing default margins from the body element, And then there's the custom component styles. I'll teach you how that works later. And finally, the most important part, which are the utilities. It contains the actual CSS generated for each utility that you use. For example, right now in our HTML, we have only text center, text LG, cyan 400, and margin top of 2. So let's see how each one of these utility classes looks like when converted to plain CSS. MT2 applies a margin top where they calculate some kind of a spacing here. This is super nice because they're using CSS variables to make the whole system super modular. They're not using absolute values.
Switch to Google Fi Wireless and get the unlimited premium phone plan with extra perks like 6 months.
Text center simply applies a text-align property of center. Text LG not only changes the font size, which is what you would assume, but also modifies the line height to make it look better. And then cyan 400 simply changes the color. So if you quickly change this color from cyan to maybe something like green, you can see that it automatically gets replaced with another style right here. And what that means is that Tailwind CSS generates styles on the fly, only for the classes we actually use. This keeps our CSS lean and efficient. Think of it like a Thanos finger snap. Change a class and the styles adjust instantly. Now let's continue experimenting with some background colors, spacings, font styles, and borders. Create a new div element that'll wrap the H1 that we have right here. That'll look something like this, and we can indent it properly. Now we can apply a class to this div and give it a bg-violet-200 color. We can also give it an h of 10 for the height, a w full, so it takes the full width of the container, border-2, border-violet-600, rounded-md to round up the corners a bit, margin y of 4 to divide it a bit from the top and bottom, and padding of 2. We can also change the H1 a bit by giving it a font of mono, font-extra bold. And there we go. It says hello world. And we never entered another file. We did everything within this HTML, or later on this will be JSX or even TSX file, because Tailwind is widely used in React and Next.js. So let me actually break down what happened here. wfull and h10 are width and height properties. The full simply sets the width to 100% of the container, and h10 simply provides about 2.5 rem or about 40 pixels of height. bg-violet 200 applies a background color, and 200 stands for a shade of that color. Next, border 2 and border violet 600 simply apply a border, first by giving it a border width, and of course this gives it a border color. Rounded MD applies a medium border radius to make the corners rounded. Margin Y of 4 is interesting. It applies a margin, but why margin Y? Well, you could have done margin top, which would apply something on the top. You could do margin left for left, right for right, or bottom for bottom. Or you can use Y for top and bottom, like Y-axis, or X for left and right. It's super flexible. The full notation looks something like this. You say M, and then you can either apply top, right, bottom, left, or Y or X, and then the size you want to apply it. And the same thing goes with the padding. You can say padding, top, bottom, left, right, X, Y, whatever you want to do, or if you don't apply anything, it'll apply it on all sides. Finally, we have text center, which you already know what it does. Font simply applies a font family, and this changes the font weight. And while we're here, we can also have a quick lesson on margins and paddings. Many developers confuse the two. Margin is an external spacing, which pushes the element away from others, while padding is internal spacing, so it adds space inside of an element. So if I put this on the right side so it's easier to see what's happening, and if I increase margin Y to something like 10, you'll see that it pushes more from top, but also a flex container, and give it a justify center, as well as items center properties. There we go. So now you know a bit more about different types of properties that we can apply to different elements using Tailwind. The possibilities are really endless, and even though it might seem like I'm coming up with these names off the top of my head, memorizing them is super simple once you get a hang of it. And of course, another pro tip is if you want to figure out what the actual CSS value of a specific property is, just hover over it and you'll see exactly what it does. They even provided this nice comment to tell you exactly how many rems or pixels padding of 6 applies. This was simple and fairly high level, but in the next lesson, I'll let you know the Tailwind superpower. Tailwind CSS isn't just about predefined utility classes. It's also incredibly flexible thanks to its just-in-time compiler, also known as JIT. The JIT compiler generates styles on demand, which means that Tailwind only includes the exact styles your project uses keeping your final CSS small and efficient. For example, let's say you want to rename this h1 to jsmastery.pro, which is the URL of a code platform we've been building for months that allows you to create custom learning paths. And also, let's say you want to give it a font size of something like 13 pixels, which is not a predefined Tailwind utility. Normally, you would have to create an inline style or give it a custom class, but with the JIT compiler, you can do this instead. Text-13 pixels within square brackets, just like this. Or you can do something like 20, or even 30. It is completely up to you. Any value you want, you can apply it automatically, and the JIT compiler will add it to the generated CSS, removing all the unused style, only keeping the used ones, keeping your CSS bundle as small as possible. So why is this JIT compiler such a big thing? Well, first of all, because it optimizes performance, generating only what you need. It gives you faster build times because it doesn't need to pre-compile thousands of different classes. It supports arbitrary values, which means that you can pass any custom size, color, or property to make your website super unique. And it works seamlessly in both development and production. And the best part is that it is completely built into Tailwind by default without any extra setup. So now that you understand the core mechanics behind how Tailwind CSS works, let's move on to layouts and Flexbox, because knowing how to style elements is useless if you don't know how to position them. Tailwind provides powerful utilities for structuring layouts with positioning, display properties, Flexbox, and grid. So let's go over them one by one. Most of the time, you'll see yourself using display, position, and maybe sometimes overflow CSS properties. So let's first talk about positioning. Positioning defines where an element appears relative to its container or the viewport. There's a position of relative, which moves the element relative to its normal position. Then there's absolute, which moves it to the nearest parent. There's also a fixed position, which sticks the element to the viewport so it doesn't scroll, as well as position sticky, which makes it behave normally until scrolled to a certain point. For example, if you create a red 10 by 10 square and you give it a top 0 property, it'll be fixed at the top of the page regardless of your scroll position. Then, much more important than position, there's display, and specifically Flexbox in Tailwind. It determines how an element behaves in terms of layout and visibility within the document. It's one of those must-have CSS skills for creating responsive layouts, and the moment you master Flex, well, you can flex on everyone. There's display block, which simply takes up the full width. There's display inline, which behaves like text, which means that it doesn't have any width or height. And finally, there are two very powerful display properties. The first one is Flex, which enables Flexbox, and the second one is Display Grid, which enables the CSS grid properties. So let's start by exploring Flexbox in action. I'll create a new div that has a class equal to Flex, which just enables Flexbox. Then I'll give it justify-end, which will align the items within the container to the right. And finally, space-x-6, which will add some spacing in between the elements. So let's add that inner element of div, and we can also just immediately close it. I'll give it a class equal to h of 16 for the height, w of 16 for the width, rounded-full to make it into a circle, and a bg of blue 500. Now I'll duplicate this div right below 2 times. And immediately you'll see 3 different circles. Let's also apply a bit of a margin top of 2 to give them some space. And let's change the colors. Let's go with blue, orange, and green. There we go. Oh, and it looks like I almost remade the letterbox logo. That was fun. But hey, just by putting these 3 different divs right here, you can play with the Flex layout. Maybe change it from justify end to justify around, baseline, between, center, and evenly. Whatever you want to do, you can totally do it and see it happening live right here. But what if you want to have a column-based layout where the elements are not one next to another, but rather one on top of the other? Well, you can do that very easily by assigning it a flex-col property, which stands for column. And of course, if you want to modify how the elements appear on a column, instead of using justify properties, you can use items-properties. So you can center them, end them, start them, stretch them. You can do whatever you want with it. For now, I can just put justify center, item center as well, and give it a space y of 6 instead of x of 6. And now we have 3 vertical circles. Now these circles could be anything. They could be divs, they could be images. You're free to move the content however you'd like across the screen, allowing you to create any kind of layout. Even this Tailwind screen that you're seeing right now is just a series of rectangles. In CSS, everything is a rectangle. See this part right here? Well, it's a rectangle. This preview window, also a rectangle. This button.
You thought C++ was just C with classes?
Well, I think you can guess it. And that's exactly what makes Flexbox positioning super useful. And if you want to practice some Flexbox or learn it for the first time, there's a game called Flexbox Froggy that helps you learn Flexbox. The goal of the game is simple. You just have to move the frog from water to its pond. So in this case, you need to apply a justify content of FlexEnt. And trust me, the levels get much more difficult.
Oh, we should do
so
that.
You'll have to really practice it and know.
What? That looks fun. Is it pay to play? Is it pay to play? Oh, here we go. Okay, so display flex. Justify content. Flex. Okay. Okay. Content. This is fun. Okay, we need to move them to the center. Ah, level 2! Oh! Okay. So that also has to go center. And then we have to say evenly. Oh no. Okay, space between. Around. Ah, I want it around. Okay, now we need to get okay, we need to now use a line item to help the frogs get to the bottom of the pond. Line items. No, so we say flex in. Okay, so align items is the Y direction, justify content is the X direction. Neither far to the center of the content. Hang it up, punk. Oh, got me there. Got me there, dude. Okay, and then we go column. Okay, got a reverse row here, but align items just for content. Okay, so we gotta go. Oh, sorry. Okay, now we need to shift these down. Now we'll go. Is it bottom? No. Line items has values of flex end. Oh, so that's in the, so it's justified content. Yeah, Y direction. Okay, so now we need to flip them. So go. Can I stack these? No. Oh, column reverse. And then content space between. Okay, so now we flex. So it's already row. So let's just go row reverse. Align items center. Just center on that. Now I need to get to the end. So to get down there, I need to go in the Y direction. So justify content, I go flex N here. No. Come on. Here. On the line items flex, and there we go. Okay, I just want to swap yellow. Or- Zero is the middle. One would be there. And then you could do order. Use orders properties in the right. Another property you can apply is line self. Right? That. Okay, let's go back to the.
Your way around it. This is a property that we used not that long ago. It's justify content, simple. Let's just remove the flex and flex call properties, as well as the item center and justify center. Heck, we can remove everything. And let's just apply a grid property, as well as grid-calls-3, which stands for 3 columns. And we can also apply a gap of 2 in between the elements. We can also give it a margin top of 2 to divide it from the top, and a margin X of 2 to divide it from the corners. Now, what's cool about this grid is that if you don't provide it the width, it'll naturally expand to fill its space. You can do similar things with Flexbox, but grid makes it super simple to fill out the entire width or height of something. So, in simple words, this code right here creates a 3-column layout. You can change it to something like 5, which will make it a 5-column layout, giving us space for 2 more elements. As with Flexbox, there's many other grid properties that you can use, from columns, rows, flows, and more, to truly master it. And if you're new to CSS Grid, well, there's no frogs here, but a grid garden. It works very similarly to Flexbox Froggy, but it doesn't have as good of a name. Here, you can move different things around to grow your garden. So with that in mind, you now know the basics of how we can position your elements within a layout using Grid and Flexbox. It's simple to use them. How to make your websites look good on all different kinds of device points. It gives you a set of predefined device widths, ranging from small, medium, and large to extra large. What's cool about them is that by default, they set a min width, which means that it sets styles for a specific screen width or larger, not smaller. Okay, that means that we're talking about a mobile-first methodology. Still, you're open to use something known as a max width to set up styles for a specific screen width or smaller. But as I said, Tailwind is mobile first, so the min width queries will be applied by default. Now, let me show you how that works in practice. Let's say that we have a div.
Now that I use Monday service, AI makes solving tickets my form of meditation.
And that div will render a p tag.
All right, that was a good place for us to stop here. My dog's looking at me. She's pissed. She wants some loving, so I gotta give her some pets and say, peace out for tonight, guys. We watched half of this one. We'll watch the rest half later. I have a really cool idea. If you guys haven't subscribed yet, we're 6 away. There's 13 people in here. Oh, it's Tim. You're back. I thought you were snoozing. Yeah, so justify content, right? Justify content. Is the X direction. Align items is the Y direction. Gotta like get that tattooed on my. Tim, are you gonna participate in the whackathon? I have a good idea for a project that I think would be pretty like useful for like businesses or any like just general cases. Like a pretty universal kind of like business tool thing. log on again at 3 a.m. bro. We got one. Oh, we lost a sub. I asked for a sub. We lost a sub. We're almost to 2.1K. I appreciate you guys being here. I'm going to sign off here. We'll watch the rest of this video tomorrow. But I'm going to build my next project, I think, with Tailwind and React and whatever. So I need to build my spectroscopy project. And then I want to build this other idea I have. But yeah, so Tim, are you gonna be on? Are you gonna join the project? My cat's taking a crap. The cat is in the box scraping around. Oh, dropping like flies over here. We gotta get off, Tim. The subs are dropping like flies. They don't like that we're getting off here. Dang. Oh, got it back. You guys are killing me, dude. Alright, I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. I'm tired. Peace out.